She says, what they need to understand, Bob, is that this is red state weed. This is what's being sold and demanded in more conservative states that are not going to have a dispensary system that looks or feels like what we have in Colorado or what we see in other states on the marijuana side. And it really, really stuck with me there. I asked her for permission to use that term, and she ultimately did coin that term. But I think it's accurate. And I think it's accurate because the other notion about red state weed is, believe it or not, there does not appear to be a stigma, or at least not even close to the stigma that exists around marijuana when you talk about hemp or hemp extracts.
That's cannabis lawyer and hemp visionary Robert Hoban. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and today I will be talking to Robert Hoban. He has recently written a 5-part series at Forbes.com about the state of the modern-day hemp industry. We're going to talk about that story, what's in it, why he wrote it, who he wrote it for. Of course, we'll talk about red state weed, a term he says that was coined by his colleague Laura Long in Colorado. Anyway, you're in for a treat today. Lots of good stuff in this episode. We'll take a quick sponsor break and then come back with a few nuggets of hemp news and then get into my conversation with Robert Hoban. This episode is brought to you in part by I&D Hemp in Fort Benton, Montana, where they believe in the goodness of hemp. I&D Hemp is a family-owned, mission-driven, and environmentally focused industrial hemp food, feed, and fiber company, providing new opportunities for farmers and rural communities. Their mission is to provide innovative agricultural products and services to connect American farmers with the pioneers and businesses that see hemp as a way to bring real and lasting change to our communities and planet. Learn more at indhemp.com. This episode is brought to you in part by Impactful Ventures, an investment and incubation company focused on supporting startups and other initiatives that play a vital role in mitigating the adverse effects of climate change. At Impactful Ventures, they strive to amplify enterprises that bring innovative, green opportunities to the forefront and empower those making a significant impact for a sustainable future. You can learn more at impactfulventures.org.
The KP4 Hemp Cutter, introducing a revolution in hemp harvesting, setting a new standard for harvesting quality, speed, and efficiency. The KP4 prepares hemp for ideal retting and easy on-field tedding, raking, and baling. Easy to maintain and designed to withstand the punishments of hemp harvesting. The KP4 Hemp Cutter. Available only at hempcutter.com.
Okay, welcome back. So here we are. It's Today's February 21st, 2024, if you're keeping track at home. I've got a handful of news nuggets here for you this week. I know last week I was under the weather, so thank you for your patience with me. I'm doing much better now, thank you. Anyway, a couple of news nuggets here. This first one, I found this on farmprogress.com. Some changes coming in Pennsylvania's hemp sampling protocol. So in Pennsylvania, growers of hemp, fiber, or grain crops can now opt for performance-based sampling instead of compliance sampling under certain conditions. The Department of Agriculture offers 3 categories of performance-based sampling, including one for fiber and grain varieties. I will have more about this next week. All right, out there in Oklahoma, they're starting to take a closer look at hemp. A potential new task force in Oklahoma aims to explore the benefits of industrial hemp beyond its association with marijuana. Senate Bill 1422, if enacted, would establish the Oklahoma Industrial Hemp Task Force to assess the impacts of hemp production and processing in the state. The task force, comprising of 7 members with relevant expertise, seeks to promote education and research on hemp's nutritional and industrial uses, including biodegradable plastics and oil products. Proponents like State Senator Roland Peterson and Robert Mitchell envision hemp as a versatile resource with applications in construction, energy storage, and agriculture. They emphasize the need to clear regulatory hurdles to unlock the full potential of the hemp industry in the United States. Yeah, go Oklahoma. right? You don't want to rush into industrial hemp, but yeah, it's good that you're taking a look at it sooner than later. Okay, another story here. This story is from mjbizdaily.com, but essentially the story is that advocates are celebrating the inclusion of hemp in the USDA Census of Agriculture, which came out recently. The census provides detailed data on hemp cultivation, including acreage and production for various purposes, such as fiber, floral, and grain. State and county data reveal variations in hemp cultivation across the country, with Missouri leading in fiber acreage, North Dakota with grain acreage, and Oregon in CBD production. The growing demand for hemp-derived products underscores its economic importance and potential, with advocates pushing for greater recognition and support at the federal level. Yeah. Oh, and there's this story in The Guardian about industrial hemp, about hempcrete, and the headline is, "It's almost carbon negative, how hemp became a surprise building material." Surprise! We've known about it for a while. They've been using it in Europe for decades, centuries, millennia, I don't know. Anyway, that's the news here from where I am, here in Pennsylvania. If you want to read these stories, go to lancasterfarming.com, find the show page for this episode, and I will have all of those news stories linked right there. All right, let's get into my conversation with Robert Hoban. Bob Hoban, cannabis attorney, industry leader, philosopher of hemp. Welcome to the Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great today. It's great to be here, and love to talk at a deep level about one of my favorite topics, and that's the cannabis plant, hemp in particular.
Absolutely, yeah. So you've been, a thought leader in this space for years now, and it is an honor to speak with you here today. So thank you for taking the time for us.
It's my pleasure. Yeah,
so back in December, you began publishing a 5-part series at Forbes.com about the modern day hemp industry. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk to you about all that because there's so many great points in there. It was just a wonderful read, But first, I wondered if you could just introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
Sure. Yeah. Again, thank you for having me. It's really great to be here. My name is Bob Hoban. I'm an attorney. I've specialized in the cannabis space. And when I talk about the cannabis space, to me, the cannabis industry has two distinct sectors, the hemp sector and the marijuana sector. I've had my foot planted firmly on each side of the cannabis industry for about 16 years now. I am proud of a lot of the pioneering work that my team and I have done. It all started on the hemp side with a very good friend of mine who used to work for a natural products company called Nordic Naturals, one of the largest fish oil companies in the world. Mm-hmm. One of the first CBD companies, which was called Cannavest at the time. Cannavest and Hemp Meds began in outside of San Diego, California. Almost 11 or 12 years ago now. And my good friend was hired from Nordic Naturals along with their entire sales team to go to Cannavest to sell something called CBD. And at the time, I was vaguely familiar with what it is, but I was asked a very direct question. Is CBD legal under the Controlled Substances Act? And I said, I didn't know the answer at that point in time. I said, give me 3 weeks. I'm going to do the deepest dive I can possibly do. And I did. And when I came back with my analysis based on the definition of marijuana spelled with an H under our Controlled Substances Act, it was quite clear to me that certain elements of the plant and certain variations of the plant grown internationally were indeed lawful under our Controlled Substances Act, and CBD is not and was never a scheduled substance. So we began to work with CBD companies, 12 years ago, and that's moved forward to THCA, to fiber, to grain. I built and owned a hemp seed company in 2015 to 2019, importing and licensing some of the finest genetics from around the world from long-standing hemp seed banks. And that's a little bit of how I got into this space. And
Right on.
proud to say here we sit in February of 2024, and my legal career is transitioning more into just an advisory role, and I'm
Okay.
very proud about that.
Cool. Well, in the piece you wrote for Forbes, I pulled out a couple of quotes, and you just mentioned the early days of the CBD space, and I kind of feel like you're possibly responsible for all of this, right? Because you write that you wrote various legal opinions. Hold on. I wrote various legal opinion letters and analyses on this topic, which caused my clients' revenues to skyrocket very quickly. It caused countless other individuals to enter the CBD space as the craze had officially begun. So that's a pretty cool, I don't know, feather in your cap. Even like the work you did then led to a big change, right?
It did, and it's a feather in the cap, but it's just something I'm quite proud of. I mean, I'm a user of CBD, and I know so many people that benefit from it when nobody knew what it was at the time, or that's a bit of an overstatement, but most people didn't know what it was.
Right.
And, I wrote an opinion letter, the letter I referenced a moment ago, when I said, "Let me tell you, give me 3 weeks, I'll tell you whether CBD is legal or not."
Yeah.
And that letter became, against my express permission, it was put on a stick drive back in the days of stick drives. And those stick drives were given out to about 500 people that attended a CBD seminar at Natural Products Expo West. And this was really before everybody was talking about this stuff. And before I knew it, hundreds of these companies had my letter. And we very quickly became the go-to lawyers and firm for that distinct product line and this sector.
And now you're in Mexico.
Now I'm in Mexico. I
Right
hightailed it down to Mexico for what it's worth.
So are those little stick drives? They'd be a collector's item now, right? So if anybody's got one of those, hold on to it for the hemp museum.
It was encased in bamboo, and it had an etching on the side that said cannabis. So if anybody's got one of those, please let me know or send me a picture. Love to see it.
Nice. So yeah, I mean, I saw my first field of industrial hemp in 2017. I, of course, had read Jack Herer's book years before that. So there's a lot of, that information kind of already in my brain. And when I saw that field of hemp at the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania, I was like, all right, we're doing this. I was caught off guard by CBD. I didn't see that. Yeah, I had no idea. Granted, I wasn't covering the industry at that point. I was just covering something else at that Rodale Institute that day, but it led to this, and I've learned a whole lot more about the cannabis plant in the meantime. And wow, what a journey you've been on.
It's been a wild ride, correct? And but that's the thing, how quickly something can go from the unknown to I don't want to say mainstream, but there are very few and far between when you meet somebody that doesn't know what CBD is in this day and age. And right. That's a credit to those pioneering companies, to all of the activists and the folks that have pushed things so far to this day, and just proud of our clients for putting the trust in us to help devise their business plans and help them along the way. Right, it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, I mean, most people know CBD. I think most people have a positive, idea of it. But I know some farmers at this point don't. I know we cover agriculture here in Pennsylvania, and some folks don't want to hear about hemp now because of how they got burnt by CBD here. I mean, Pennsylvania was one of the later states in the whole thing, so I get it. I hear you, but I know it's powerful medicine. It's a great industry. But we'll get into that. Let's get back to these articles that you wrote for Forbes, because this was a fascinating story. What I'd like to do is just sort of first, go through sort of the outline and read the title of each one, and then we can dig into some stuff. So the first one is the introduction to the other one, Hemp is Cannabis. Second part was a recent history of hemp, ashes to ashes, ashes all fall down. Third part was This Ain't No Loophole, Hemp Economics and the Market. Number 4, the law come to get you if you don't walk right. Number 5, hemp, I can tell you your future, just look what's in your hand. So that kind of lays out where we're going here. And first, I want to know, like, what was your intention with this piece and who was your intended audience?
It's a great question. The intention was really to shed some light on something that I just, far too many people did not understand or even know what was happening around them. And I kept hearing things said about companies that are producing what I refer to as IHDs, or intoxicating hemp derivatives. Not everybody likes that term, but that's kind of what I've settled on. So I'll refer to these compounds as IHDs for this purpose.
Is that also red state weed?
Red state weed, IHDs, yes, those are.
All
those
right,
are,
we'll get into red state weed in a little bit, but sorry, keep going.
No, but the idea though is that that producing intoxicating compounds from the hemp plant and putting them into mainstream sales, it was happening all over the place. And again, my unique perspective is I work about 55% with the marijuana sector and about 45-50% with the hemp sector. So when I started to see the finger pointing back and forth, I just wanted to shed some light on what was happening and bring some perspective to it. And this was on the heels of fighting a policy battle in the state of Colorado, where the marijuana sector was very deliberate in its intention to shut this sector down. But we were able to show the economic analysis, thanks in part to Bo Whitney and Whitney Economics, where he showed that the state of Colorado produced, more or less $1 billion worth of exported revenue on IHDs. It had $600 million worth of infrastructure and employed 3,600 people. These were very important statistics that even the governor's office didn't know. So that's one of the reasons in the whole context of this policy debate to say, look, this is legal. Here's the economics. Here's what's happening around us. Please open your eyes and pay attention. And then the sort of icing on top, if you will, is I think that this whole scenario already brought us halfway to the legality we're seeking around the cannabis plant, but yet we keep pushing for, fruitlessly, unfortunately, at the federal level thus far. And so that was the perspective I wanted to bring. And at least I feel comfortable that I was successful in being able to do so. And the audience was really, it was on one hand an echo chamber, the people that were doing this, so that they could sort of be highlighted and shown that there's good actors doing good work and advancing policy and making good products and servicing consumer demand, employing people. But on the other hand, what about the folks that had their head in the sand, or that just didn't have their eyes open, or didn't even know what to look for if their eyes were open? That was the other sector of the audience, and quite proud of how it all turned out.
Yeah, it's great. I can tell sort of by your tone in there that you're kind of expecting to ruffle some feathers, right? Like poke a few things. What were some of like the more controversial points you were making here?
Well, I think it's the controversy centered around, well, this is not legal. This was not the intention of the Farm Bill. You know how many times I've heard that? This is not the intention of the Farm Bill. Now, between us, as people sitting here, as adults sitting here talking about it, did Mitch McConnell
industrial hemp
sit down and write a piece of legislation that he intended this downstream product to be put into the federally legal marketplace? I think not. I've never sat down and talked to Senator McConnell, but
industrial hemp,
I would venture that was not his intention.
However, you've never met him?
I've never met Senator McConnell, no. And I admire his work in the hemp sector.
Industrial hemp.
There's other policy things we disagree on, but that's neither here nor there.
You've never gone golfing with him then either?
I've never gone golfing with Mitch McConnell, no.
Fair enough. Back to Mitch.
But the intention is something that I took exception to. What is the way that you assess or measure intent behind legislation? When you go to law school, one of the first things you're taught is something called the rules of statutory construction. I won't get into the weeds, but basically it says if the plain language is unambiguous, and here the plain language is unambiguous. The plain language goes over the top to say that all derivatives, all salts, who writes that? All isomers, all salts of isomers, all downstream compounds from the plant are no longer controlled substances. And then when the DEA affirms that notion, says, yes, we have no authority here. And then furthermore, the USDA comes out and issues a policy memo that says even THC from hemp is no longer a controlled substance. It made me open my eyes. And that was really the first thing I think that ruffled feathers. They're talking about the intention. And the only legal thing that matters is what the plain language says. And that language is pretty specific. So that is one of the things. The second thing, I think, is to note that these products are, in fact, regulated and produced in a consumer-friendly manner. Not all of them, not every Delta 8, Delta 9 THC from hemp product that you see in the marketplace is a regulated product, and buyers should beware. But the good actors in the space, who I've been working with for years, have advanced substantial dollars and efforts to put regulations in place in multiple states. I've detailed most of those states in the articles. So there are robust regulations that mirror food, sanitary, and consumer protection standards for just about every other nutritional or food product. And those things apply here. So to say that there's no regulation is a bit of a misnomer. And that was one of the things that I also wanted to correct. And for some reason, those two big categories, which unequivocally are true, are the things that ruffled the most feathers. Because that's the thing. I think when people are asleep at the wheel, and I don't mean that as if they're intentionally asleep at the wheel, they just didn't know what was going on around them, and something happens, their initial reaction is to go, no, that can't be. And that makes them mad, especially when it can be, because it's a fact. And that's what I was trying to do in the first couple of pieces.
Yeah. Because, it's not a loophole. You explain it very clearly. Like, it's all legal here. This is sort of a side note, but what is a salt of isomer? Salts of isomer? To me, it sounds like an amazing sci-fi trilogy, like set in like the post-dystopian future, but like salts of isomer. What do you know what it is? You're a lawyer, not a chemist, but you know.
I am a lawyer, not a chemist, exactly correct. But the way it's been described to me is two things. That language and all of those terms were specifically pulled from other DEA rules and regulations. So there's a whole clause in there, and that language was specifically pulled. Now, they didn't know what they were doing, it seems like, when they put that specific language in there, because when you look at isomers and salts of isomers, it presumes that those compounds extracted from the hemp plant are exposed to some sort of post-extraction process. Isomerization is the way that most of our clients refer to it as, or sort of modifying those downstream products through the use of enzymes and other chemical applications. But as I've detailed, at least how it's been reported to me, those chemical processes are no different than what's used in the production of food products and preservatives and vanilla extracts, an example that keeps coming up. So again, I'm a lawyer, so I try to take the facts and verify the facts and report the same, particularly in this writing, but I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination.
Fair enough. Me neither. The term red state weed has gotten some attention, and we talked about that, the intoxicating hemp derivatives. But just talk about why you're calling it red state weed.
Well, I do have to give credit to a woman named Laura Long, who's our state-based lobbyist in the state of Colorado. She was the one that first used that term with me. She says when we brought her in to work on the state task force on these IHDs and some implementing legislation and regulations, she says, what they need to understand, Bob, is that this is red state weed. This is what's being sold and demanded in more conservative states that are not going to have a dispensary system that looks or feels like what we have in Colorado or what we see in other states on the marijuana side. And it really, really stuck with me there. I asked her for permission to use that term, and she ultimately did coin that term. But I think it's accurate. And I think it's accurate because the other notion about red state weed is, believe it or not, there does not appear to be a stigma, or at least not even close to the stigma that exists around marijuana when you talk about hemp or hemp extracts. And hence the reason why in red states, we've seen conservative politicians go to bat for these compounds to support this industry, even though they don't fully grasp, I don't believe, what it represents, what it does, and what it is.
Right, right. You make a really good point in the piece that like if states prohibit this, it's not going to change the demand. It's just going to cause maybe some safety issues because, yeah, the demand's not going to go away. People are going to find their hemp derivatives elsewhere, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the same arguments that has always been advanced concerning the legality of marijuana. And by the way, I've done a lot of international policy work. One of the reasons I bring that up is because the country of Uruguay was one of the first countries in the world to legalize cannabis outright for all purposes, without regard to medical or otherwise. And one of the reasons that it chose to do it was because of a public health reason, that the black market or illicit or traditional market, however you want to describe it, cannabis that was coming in primarily from Paraguay was laden with pesticides. It had bugs in it, things like that. So at the end of the day, when you look at one of the reasons among many that they decided to legalize cannabis in the country of Uruguay was because it would produce a product that was consumer friendly, that didn't have bugs and pesticides and heavy metals. It was produced consistently. And that model was something that was proven to sort of eliminate those inconsistencies and those consumer issues from the marketplace. So you legalize marijuana because you want consistency in your product. You want consumers to always get what they're paying for and what they're buying, and to make sure that it's safe within the realm of possibilities. And that was an argument I kept hearing, that we need to just ban this. And by the way, that was also a reaction to my experience during this legislative season in 2023. Where we went to 12 different states. 12 different states said, we're going to ban these compounds, ban them. We went in and we argued, well, if you ban them, you're simply sending consumer products that are not consumer friendly into the marketplace, that are probably produced in an unsafe manner, that it might have pesticides or residual chemicals and residual solvents that are above healthy or recognized limits. And accordingly, they said, well, let's put some standards behind this, and that was ultimately one of the reasons that resonated very deeply and caused those states, the vast majority of them, to go from let's ban it to, oh my goodness, if we ban it, it's not going to go anywhere. It's only going to be a worse scenario. Right. We might as well regulate it because after all, these compounds are federally legal.
Right. Bring it into the light. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, the whole the red state weed to me is fascinating because, yeah, like you said, THC is federally legal there, right? Like it's you kind of have to work your way through it, but you talk about like if you were to grow 100 acres of CBD hemp and a certain portion of that, like there's a fair amount of legal THC there in the field. So talk about that. And it's almost like the theme of your piece is marijuana is already legal, but we don't know it yet. Almost. Does that sound fair?
It is. And particularly when you're looking at the plant as a commodity. And again, I have a deep relationship with the plant. So to sort of just call it a commodity sometimes just doesn't feel right. But that's ultimately what does become. It does feel icky. It does feel icky because it doesn't necessarily honor the plant. But when you recognize the full range of benefits to this plant, if you go back to Jack Herer's manifesto, at the end of the day, to me, the more hemp that's planted and the broader the uses, whether those are commercial uses that some of us might find distasteful, or those uses that are actually, quite endearing and sort of honor the plant in many ways, I think it has to have room for all of those things for us to really realize the full benefit of the plant. But at the end of the day, hemp is and will be the backbone for the entire global cannabis supply chain. What do I need anything else for? Unless I'm selling an actual flower that I intend to consume in that flower state, or sort of press a rosin out of it, or do a distillate from that flower to have the exact compounds that are in that flower, then I'm really looking at cannabinoids, terpenes, and any other compounds in the plant as ingredients to be used in other products. That's kind of how plants have been used in our modern society. So when I saw that, when I think about that, you have everything you need in the hemp plant. Well, I remember getting into an argument years ago of this exact topic with a physician, an MD who treats patients with cannabis in Israel, and she said to me, "But you need THC." I said, "But there's plenty of THC in the hemp plant when you extract it and you aggregate it. But you need more than 0.3%. But what does 0.3% mean to you? 0.3% of 1,000 kilos is a significant quantity of THC. 0.3% of 1 gram is not so much. But what we're seeing also is with these hemp Delta 9 beverages being mainstream, sold in liquor stores and convenience stores all over the country, being put in music and sports venues all over the country at 2 and 5 milligrams, we're finding out that still meets this 0.3% threshold in whatever medium the THC is contained in. So I believe that the hemp plant is really all you need. I remember when a woman who was the former commissioner of agriculture in the state of Florida, she was running for governor against DeSantis before he was reelected.
Yeah, I remember
or at least in the primary on the Nikki Haley and pardon me, not Nikki Haley. But at the end of the day, she says to me, she says, "Well, what can we do with hemp?" I said, "Hemp, it's already federally legal. Why are we not allowing the extraction of it en masse and making API, active pharmaceutical grade ingredients from the hemp plant, and exporting it all over the world? Because it's legal. And when it's federally legal in the US, that matters so much more significantly around the world in terms of the treatment thereof." And her eyes sort of glazed over, and she looked at me and said, I wasn't aware that that's what federal law said. And ultimately, I think that there were many missed opportunities because we think of hemp, we kind of think of the old school uses, which are ultimately its best and sort of most wide-ranging uses, to be able to feed and clothe and house people and produce fuels and energy with the hemp plant. But what about the low-hanging fruit, the extracts? That's something we can't ignore, and I think too many people ignored it.
Yeah. Nikki Fried was her name. I tried to get her on the show back in the day, but she never wrote back to me. So sorry, Nikki, your ship has sailed. You have a great quote in your piece that sort of touches on the uses of hemp. I'll just read this, and I think it sort of like harmonizes with what you just said. But the hemp plant serves a number of different industries: apparel, home textiles, personal goods, advanced electronics, aerospace and defense, agriculture, automotive and assembly, capital projects and infrastructure, chemicals, consumer packaged goods, electric power, financial services, healthcare systems and services, metals and mining, oil and gas, paper, forest products and packaging, pharmaceuticals and medical products, private equity, public sector, retail, semiconductors, social sector, technology, media and telecommunications, and travel, transport, and logistics. It's like, right? Like can you think of any other industry that touches or has the potential to touch so many other industries?
It's such a versatile plant. As Jack said years ago, there's tens of thousands of uses for this plant. We just need to see them come to fruition. And we slowly but surely are. And that's been some of the debate, by the way. Some of the reason that the IHDs or the extract sector is sort of maligned is because the purists, the traditional hempsters, sometimes feel as if this distracts from those grandiose uses, those uses that truly are going to save the world and save the environment, or at least make things more efficient from an environmental perspective. And I believe that if, in fact, hemp is as useful as we know it is, that economics will find a way to use the hemp plant. That you can't malign it to the point where people are just going to not talk about it anymore. If in fact hemp does everything that we say it does, and we know, at least in beta tests in just about all of those sectors, it can be extremely useful and promising, if not the answer. That's really the key, is to sort of focus on getting people educated about the wide-ranging uses of the plant.
Bingo.
And if people are not going to do it, it's because there's no economic benefit. I mean, we live in a capitalistic society, so economics are ultimately going to dictate what compounds are used to produce what other compounds and products. And if hemp can do everything that we know it can do, then certainly it's going to find its place. It's just a matter of building out the infrastructure, which is slowly but surely happening since the 2018 Farm Bill.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people say that, the intoxicating hemp derivatives give the hemp industry a black eye. Like, they've been advocating for hemp for so long, and they've always said it doesn't get you high, but along comes this. So I hear that side of it, but yeah, it's like this plant provides so much. It's like you ask it for something and it will provide, right? And so these the red state weed, it's just part of it. It has to be part of it. It's already in existence. So fighting it, I think, is futile, right? You agree with me there? Like there's no reason for the infighting.
Correct.
Yeah.
And also just think about this. Do we not eat corn or grain because you can make whiskey out of it? And whiskey has caused so many problems in society, alcohol in general. I mean, I understand the argument. I think that it's just fear, and people behave irrationally when they're scared.
For sure. So. I think if alcohol had been prohibited for 80 years, maybe there would be that problem with corn now, but prohibition didn't last that long for alcohol. You were talking about the medical doctor in Israel who was talking about the THC. Now, was she talking about like the entourage effect or the ensemble effect, as people are suggesting we call it now?
Yeah, when I was having that discussion, the discussion was, well, listen, we have legal hemp. Why don't we use the compounds from the hemp plant? This was started with a conversation I had with with what was now Jazz Pharmaceutical, the GW folks, when they began to develop their compounds. I said, why are you using marijuana and all of its stringent regulations as a Schedule I substance? Why aren't you using hemp derivatives? And they kind of looked at me as if, well, why would we do that? And because you can produce it at $600 an acre, or at least en masse you can. If you want to create it horticultural style, it costs a lot more than that. But at the end of the day, those are the conversations. People didn't really think about hemp as anything other than soap and rope, to be blunt with it. And when you begin to think about it's the same exact plant, it's just the compounds are there in different ratios. People then begin to retreat to the entourage effect position. Well, no, you need THC for cannabinoids to work in the human body. Well, there's THC in hemp. How much do you need? And, the science varies between, needing a very little bit, sometimes needing none, needing a very little bit to needing a whole lot of THC in that full spectrum blend to treat or address a particular physical condition. And I think that's ultimately where even physicians who are far smarter than I on the science and than I'll ever be, they just didn't seem to grasp that concept, because to them, hemp didn't have THC, or if it did, it was just enough that it didn't make a difference. And I think the science now shows us that a little bit of THC goes a long way. But even if it doesn't, you aggregate the THC from the plant.
All right. So you see the cannabis industry try that again. You see the cannabis industry sort of split into two. There's the marijuana side and the hemp side. And then the hemp side is also kind of split in two, right? Between floral production, cannabinoid production, and the industrial uses. Do you ever see a world where the split wouldn't be between marijuana and hemp, but between, cannabinoids and industrial? Like where, the CBD and all that stuff would just kind of be over and regulated and handled in the same bucket as high THC?
Yeah, I do. I think that that is the future. I don't know if that's a 2 year or 20-year future. It really depends on how fast we move. And believe it or not, despite sort of the old school notions and the stigma surrounding the plant as a whole, historically, when we talk about marijuana and the scheduling thereof, what people learn because science supports everything that the industry advances. Not everything, but just about everything. So people learn very quickly. Politicians learn very quickly. So in this day and age, with information available and in real time, you can see how things can occur, and science supports it. I think you see drastic movement, and that's why around the world, I've worked in over 30 countries around the world working on cannabis policy. In doing so, I recognize that many of the countries don't want to make a distinction between hemp and marijuana. They want to have cannabis and then regulate its uses. So cannabis is a plant that can be grown. And we've advocated for this in the US, something called tri-cropping, right? If I take a hemp plant, I can produce fiber, grain, and capture the cannabinoids from one plant,
But
and use all parts of it.
yeah, but you get an inferior version of every one of those things, right?
Correct. Yeah, you absolutely do. The cannabinoid profile wouldn't be as robust.
Right. Yeah.
The seeds wouldn't be so forth and so on. But at the end of the day, genetics can advance to the point with crossbreeding and otherwise where that becomes a stronger proposition. And what we advocated for years was capturing your keef, the trichomes, the crystals from the plant that contain the cannabinoids. Capture them as your waste product. Don't make your business plan around that. Break even on grain or fiber or both. That's not a terribly difficult proposition if you're modest about your production. And then you have cannabinoids in the form of keef that you can process somehow, some way, isolate, extract, or otherwise. And someday that keef might make you rich. Other days you're not going to be able to move it, just like we saw with sort of the fall of the CBD sector for some time now. So it's not the most efficient way to use the plant, but I do believe that cannabis will ultimately be grown and the farmers will be registered or licensed. And ultimately, its uses will dictate the regulation or how stringent those regulations are. If I'm going to take a derivative, a cannabinoid off the plant and use it, then there's going to be more stringent regulations, whether that goes into pharmaceutical products or over-the-counter products or soap or shampoo or toothpaste, versus if I'm simply going to take the fiber and use it that way. And ultimately, that's where we believe the regulations already exist for those types of compounds and products, which also begs the question here, is hemp its own industry, or is hemp merely a commodity that services, to our point, multiple industries? And I don't want to detract from the hard workers in the hemp industry to say that hemp is not an industry, but it really is intended to service other industries, as we talked a little bit about a few moments ago.
I think a lot of folks in the industrial side would say, yeah, we just want to make ingredients. I remember talking to the guys at Victory Foods a couple years ago, and they're like, we make food, not edibles. I don't know, I thought it was a good quote. But yeah. I mean, I think the folks at IND Hemp up there, they're processing because they want to get, materials into the different streams. Like, yeah, I don't think it's all about like hemp is the answer. It's about here is a commodity crop that can be really useful, that can solve a lot of problems. Let's figure out a way to get it, to the masses. It's like a refinery system almost, right? Like oil comes in and then they refine it and it goes out to all the different things. It's like when I read that paragraph of yours of all the different things hemp can do, to me, it's like that's oil. Oil can touch that many different industries, but what about an agricultural crop? Like it's just incredible, but preaching to the choir here.
And then incidentally, let me just comment on that list of uses. I mean, ultimately, I was in the running for leading a cannabis division for one of the largest consulting firms in the world, and that was part of my plan for them, was to perform 6 to 10 months of education, to visit their different units and explain in great detail, educate how hemp or cannabis derivatives, cannabis extracts, or the raw material from the plant could indeed benefit those individual sectors, so that when somebody said, hey, we'd like to think about hemp for packaging, or we'd like to think about hemp for alternative fuels or otherwise, it wasn't something that someone would just scoff at and go, what are you talking about? They would actually have some grounding and recognize that this plant is capable of those things. And that still is a goal of mine for the future.
When I think about like consumer packaging, I think how easy, I mean, I'm a simpleton, granted, how easy it would be for, let's say, Jeff Bezos to, make a policy decision at the top of Amazon about their packaging, like, hey, in 5 years from now, I want to have 25% of all of our boxes getting mailed out. I want them to be, hemp, cardboard, whatever. Like, it could be easy, but then again, I'm a dreamer, I'm a simpleton, and I don't think Jeff Bezos listens to our podcast.
We'll have to change that. But I can also say that I think that at the end of the day, we just need more biomass in the United States. We need more biomass, and to have more biomass, I don't want to undercut the market before it even has a chance to mature. But more biomass brings the cost of that biomass down. And if the cost is down, then it sort of creates some additional dollars to either retool machinery that's already in existence, or to create new machinery that would make the facilitation, for example, hemp packaging, or at least hemp being utilized in packaging, much more feasible. It's the same thing with hemp grain, for example. Victory Foods, a great company. I'm a fan and a consumer. At the end of the day, hemp seed is not offered at a Jamba Juice as an addition to your smoothie like chia seeds would be, because it's cost prohibitive at this point. It's $12 for this quantity versus $1.20. Yes, It's too fancy right now. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I often find myself thinking about like marketing campaigns, like how do we reach consumers? I don't know. It's I've got some ideas. Anyway, let's get back to the Forbes story. Yes, it's chapter 4, number 4. I don't know what you call these, but the fourth article.
Part 4.
You debunk a bunch of myths, right? And one of those myths is that Congress is going to fix this. Just talk a little bit about that. Debunk that myth for us. What's the myth, and why is it a myth?
So why would we believe? Let's talk about cannabis for a second. Why would the cannabis sector, any side of the cannabis sector, who has suffered, through prohibition for, as you point out, 80 plus years on one side of the plant, and on the other side of the sector of the industry, it still suffers from that prohibition. All of a sudden, we think Congress is going to bail out the industry that it has kept, under wraps for so long. That doesn't resonate with me. Furthermore, the issues become politicized. I think that's sort of symbolic in the term red state weed, right? Can you imagine Congress, whether it's led by the blue side or the red side? I take no sides politically. And say, all right, the red politicians have said this is the way it's going to be. The blue politicians are not going to follow suit. And likewise, if Congress were to roll this back, Congress, which right now, in the face of a blue White House, imagine all of the conservative states that have this sector, the IHD sector, and the thousands of jobs and millions of dollars of infrastructure and revenue, saying, oh yeah, the blue White House just told us that we can't do this any longer, so we should stop. It just doesn't seem to be the world we live in, and it also presumes that R's and D's can work across the aisle on controversial issues. And I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit of a cynic, but I don't believe that Congress can function effectively.
Yeah,
if something can be done, it needs to be done at a regulatory level by an agency to protect consumers. But I don't think that solves the problem. When you have two sides diametrically opposed, it usually leads to status quo or deadlock. And status quo is the existing Farm Bill language. And I fully expect that to remain the same.
So in the fifth and final part of your series, You say that you can tell the future, just look at what's in your hand. I don't want to give too much away, but do you want to maybe tease that a little bit or tell us what you see?
Yeah, I see the merging of the systems. I don't see that it's viable, even though our federal language and our statute effectively requires the distinction between hemp and marijuana. I don't see it being viable in the marketplace. It's not viable for farmers to maintain these distinct sectors. I believe that the systems will merge, and that will be without regard to industrial uses. Industrial uses, if the plant material has been stripped of its cannabinoids or doesn't contain sufficient cannabinoids, whatever sufficient means under rules, regulations, or laws, then those compounds could be used for industrial purposes. But if we're going to take compounds off of the plant, I believe all of these compounds ultimately result in merged systems. And unfortunately, the marijuana sector wants to pull down the hemp sector. They're saying, wait a second, it's not fair that you get to operate mainstream and without all of these stringent regulations, so forth and so on, ignoring that the regulations exist. But why pull one side down because of the pain you suffered going through strict regulation for years? Why not look at that as the model you want to be and elevate yourself to that level? That's the thing that is sort of protectionist and is driven by lawyers and lobbyists, unfortunately. Sort of this not in my backyard or protect what you've got notion. It's only natural, but to look at it more holistically, to follow consumer behavior. Consumers want these products. They want these compounds. And I'd like to say that consumer behavior takes the day in the United States. If that were true, then marijuana would be legal right now, but it's not. But hemp is legal, and we get the same exact compounds out of the plant, and it is federally legal. So when you look at that balance, I believe that consumer behavior will dictate that this will continue to exist. We're starting to see large-scale alcohol industry participants say, not only dip their toe in the water, coming in and saying, we are going to own this space. And when they say this space, they mean the D9 hemp derivative, 2 and 5 milligram beverage sector. Right. So then all of a sudden, you've got the largest alcohol producers and distributors in the country saying they're going to own this category. We know that Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell have been beholden to the alcohol industry for decades. It's part of what have kept them in office in leadership positions.
For the children.
Industrial hemp.
Do we think that all of a sudden this benevolent body called Congress is going to go out and save everybody from IHDs when the alcohol lobby is all of a sudden pivoting to say, no, not only do we want this, we want to own this category. I don't believe that that's realistic or reasonable, but the upshot is that the marijuana sector should be freed from restraints, not bring the hemp sector down to match it.
Bob Hoban, you have given me so much to think about. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
I appreciate it. My pleasure to be here, and I look forward to talking to you again.
All right. Well, that's the end of the show. Thank you for listening. Before we go, I have a sort of an odd request. I wonder, I'm always trying to figure out who's listening to our show. Like, who are you? And if you're up for it, I wonder if you could, with your cell phone, record a little voice memo. Tell me, where you are, how you listen to the show, that sort of thing, and then just email it to me. You can send it directly to podcast@lancasterfarming.com. So I would love to hear from you. Anyway, my name is Eric Herlock. I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online at lancasterfarming.com. Lots of good stuff for you there. Anyway, until next time, I will see you in the newspaper.
Industrial hemp.
This episode of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2024 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show is written and recorded, edited and produced by Eric Herlock. The music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.